he doesn't make a big show of his dominance because it's understood that everyone in Russia knows that if they say something that displeases him, they'll be thrown out of a window. He's the man, the star of the show, Vlad. He's lost a lot of his hair. His face has become quite puffy. People have suggested that he may be actually on steroid medication, which has given him that moon face. He's a lot less actively dominant. As soon as the Russian starts, he literally sticks out his tongue and then starts twiddling his fingers like, what a waste of my time. It's very interesting how little patience and how little self-control Kim Jong-un has compared to Vladimir Putin. Patrushev is the only person inside of Russia that Putin is genuinely terrified of. They're friends and old friends, but Patrushev is at the same level, or for a long time was at the same level as Putin. And he thinks at the same way that Putin does. My name is Professor Harry Witchell, and I am a communications expert specializing in nonverbal communication, which some people call body language. And I'm in the Department of Clinical Neuroscience at Brighton and Sussex Medical School on the University of Sussex campus. Over the years, Vladimir Putin has changed quite a lot in my observations in body language. Putin is fundamentally someone who's very self-controlled. Unlike his former president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, Vladimir Putin doesn't drink. He's very careful. He's a rational actor, although when I say rational, it doesn't mean he's necessarily moral. And he's very self-possessed. He walks around like with his limbs, everything being taut, like a tiger about to spring. So he's a very although he's small and not physically imposing, he's ready. He's physically ready. Over time, though, of course, he has changed. You can see his appearance has changed. Plainly, he's lost a lot of his hair. His face has become quite puffy. People have suggested that he may be actually on steroid medication, which has given him that moon face. He's a lot less actively dominant and more dominant in an understated way. That is, rather than using his body to control others and to take possession of the space, he's more likely to sort of mumble a bit. You know, he talks Russian in a very understated way, and he doesn't make a big show of his dominance because it's understood that everyone in Russia knows that if they say something that displeases him, they'll be thrown out of a window. So when you look at the photographs of Putin or the videos of Putin talking to his other colleagues, say before a parade, you'll see that although he's a very dangerous man, all of his major aides want to be as close to him as possible, that he is the man, the center of interest. And they all lean into him. They're all mostly taller than Putin. But this is a way, if you lean in, it's sometimes in body language, it's called pecking. If you lean in, it means that you're beta and the other person is the dominant person, attracting your attention. Trump and Putin are both deal makers. And Putin has spent a long time currying favor with Trump. I'm now speculating, but I think that Putin views Trump as not particularly educated, a bit of the way most Europeans would view Trump, which is slightly oafish and poorly educated. Whereas when you listen to Putin, when Putin meets people, he often begins by giving them a history lesson. So Putin really, and of course, Putin has been educated as a lawyer. So Putin has very high intellectual aspirations, as opposed to, say, Trump, Trump's position is, if you're so smart, why aren't you president? If you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Trump really only respects money. But of course, Putin is the wealthiest man on earth. When Trump and Putin mostly get along, what they do is Trump will talk to Putin and make usual warm gestures, just lightly touching Putin. Putin is less friendly with Trump. He views Trump as possibly a former employee. So he's, again, I'm speculating here, but Putin is less likely to take Trump seriously, whereas Trump views Putin as an aspirational figure. In this old image of younger days for Vladimir Putin and Ramzan Kadyrov, they are in what we call in body language, they're in rapport. They're mirroring each other. It shows that they are seeing eye to eye. They enjoy each other's company. They understand one another. And that's because at this point, both of them are leaders of their own country. And Putin is very dependent on Kadyrov. In those days, Kadyrov was what made Putin most successful. Putin was very dependent on the Chechen changes in the early days of his regime to get things forward. That's not quite the same anymore. Kadyrov may be on the outs, but the point is, in terms of body language, they saw in the old days eye to eye, even though now, realistically, Kadyrov is not in the same league as Putin. Putin is a much higher figure in the world, much more wealthy, much stronger. So it's slightly different. And of course, Putin is much older and more mature than Kadyrov.
Отсюда мы планируем запускать тяжелые космические аппараты, в том числе и пилотируемые.
In this fascinating video, in which Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin are basically standing as part of a activity or ceremonial action. At the beginning of the video, you can see that they're being spoken to in Korean, and Kim Jong-un is nodding his head. Vladimir Putin is seemingly standing with his arms sort of held behind his back in a sort of a holding back position. But Putin is very capable of controlling himself. Whereas when the voices change from speaking in Korean to speaking to them in Russian, immediately you can see that Kim Jong-un, who is very little self-conscious, he's very little self-consciousness. He's basically a very young dictator and has been able to get away with anything. So he's never really learned to control himself. As soon as the Russian starts, he literally sticks out his tongue and then starts twiddling his fingers like, what a waste of my time. It's very interesting how little patience and how little self-control Kim Jong-un has compared to Vladimir Putin, who is, of course, in some ways, Vladimir Putin is a true statesman at this point, whether we agree with him or not. So in this video, one really noticeable issue is their propinquity between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. Obviously, this is a set piece, a way that people interact, but it shows no warmth or bonhomie or friendship. Instead, Putin and Kim Jong-un are having a structured, a transactional relationship where they both need what the other is offering. So Putin needs weapons and he needs soldiers, and Kim Jong-un needs technology, but he also needs more nuclear backup. So if Kim Jong-un were to start a war, this is basically, they've started a relationship like NATO. So if Kim Jong-un happens to start a war with one of his opponents, Putin will be dragged into it. And Putin and Russia are much more powerful. So that if America were to end up, for one reason or another, attacking or fighting with North Korea, this move by Kim Jong-un, obviously I'm speculating, but this move sort of forces Putin and Russia to join in. And so it makes North Korea potentially a much more dangerous adversary. Are trying to communicate in different languages. It's the single biggest barrier in cultural and communication is if people don't see eye to eye in terms of language. You can't really express yourself. So I think that if you watch the way she moves, he's I think he could be, besides the fact that he's probably quite murderous and unequivocal. Mostly, she is probably a normal businessman, other than this, that he talks in a very relaxed way. He moves in a fairly relaxed way. And he's talking to Putin in that video as if it's just an old friend. Of course, everything is delayed because after each expression and discussion, things have to be translated from Chinese to Russian. Then Putin can respond, and then things have to be translated back from Russian to Chinese. It's quite interesting to look at them when they finally sit down, and you can see their translators trying to act as invisible as impossible. And they're the little skinny guys wandering around, whereas these other guys are the big world leaders, as opposed to the little gangly translators. Yeah, you can see that there's this brief moment. I mean, you can see that she is probably pretty easy to get along with. But the issue is that, of course, because everything has to be translated, there's this moment where they say something and then she has to look up and find out what just happened. But they're able to be friendly. I think that Putin may not view, well, Putin is not a very relaxed guy, except around other Russians. Yeah, it's lonely at the top. He has I don't think he has many good friends in Russia, maybe people like Nikolai Patrushev. But for the most part, it's very difficult for Putin to level with people because everyone sort of works for him and so much is at stake. I mean, he can talk in a friendly way to Shoigu, but for the most part, things are very formalized. When he meets Shoigu in the video of the parade, what happens is Putin greets Shoigu with a handshake. And given that they've spent so much time together and they've gone through the ranks together so much, it's a little bit, I would find it a little bit strange to do a formal handshake with someone that you know so well and you've worked with for so long. And at that handshake, it's quite funny because it's formal. Shoigu is wearing a glove, and the handshake is awkward because Putin sticks out his hand for a handshake, and Shoigu realizes this is a formal handshake, and he has to get his glove off. So it takes a moment for him to get the glove off so he can actually give Putin a formal etiquette-based handshake.
Do you think he feels threatened by Shoigu?
Under no circumstances do I think that Putin is threatened by Shoigu. I think that Shoigu and Putin are longtime colleagues and associates. Shoigu is absolutely loyal to Putin, and they have a lot in common. In fact, in many ways, the recent reorganization of Russia, of the Russian top brass, that happened about 6 months ago, where Shoigu was put in front of the National Security Council, shows how much Putin trusts Shoigu. What actually happened in that reorganization is that Putin really needed to move Nikolai Patrushev. Patrushev is the only person inside of Russia that Putin is genuinely terrified of. They're friends and old friends, but Patrushev is at the same level, or for a long time was at the same level as Putin. And he thinks at the same way that Putin does. From the old days, Patrushev is a true equal. Of course, Patrushev was associated with the entire Siloviki and intelligence apparatus. And Patrushev took credit for the execution, the assassination of Yevgeny Prigozhin. So Putin made an agreement with Yevgeny Prigozhin that if you stop attacking Moscow, I will let you live. And 2 months later, Yevgeny Prigozhin falls out of the sky along with all of his associates, and they plummet to their death. But it's not a violation of Putin's agreement because Patrushev made the decision on his own that Prigozhin was a traitor, and then organized himself. Patrushev organized Prigozhin's death. So it wasn't really Putin violating his word. Anyway, Putin is probably aware that Patrushev is the only person with enough power and connections to organize an assassination of Putin. So Putin, I believe, I'm speculating and adding on stuff, Putin is quite worried about Patrushev. So what Putin has done is he's moved Patrushev out of a position where he can actually do damage to Putin. So instead of being in the National Security Council, where Patrushev was actually at the nexus of all of the different forms of Russian intelligence. He's moved his longtime associate and complete loyal ally, Shoigu, into that exact position. And instead, he's moved Patrushev to this position where he's second in command and also has something to do with the Navy and maritime activity. So it's a completely useless position for Patrushev because Patrushev never wants to be the president of Russia. He does not want to succeed Putin because that's exactly what he would hate doing. Patrushev is a very dangerous man, but he doesn't look like a popular or warm person. So Putin has put Patrushev in a position where Patrushev is much less threatening to Putin, and meanwhile has occupied the spot of the National Security Council with Shoigu, who is a longtime ally who is absolutely loyal. The truth is, Patrushev is loyal to Russia, but not necessarily loyal to Putin. It's like Putin being the rock star. Massive applause. He's the man, the star of the show, Vlad. Yeah. This video shows Putin walking on to a crowd, which is of course organized, and they're applauding. And he's, as his usual self, his body language is taut. He's ready, but he's getting applause. I don't really think that Putin needs that. He's not as interested in attention as Trump is. Putin just doesn't want to look weak. He's very interested in being respected. The fact that he's loved by the crowd almost is, I believe, is almost meaningless to him.